Hey, podcasters, it's Josh coming at you live from the 2024 Farm Science Review. What you're about to listen to is a raw, unedited episode of Bruce moderating a talk at Ask the Expert about carbon markets with agricultural and natural resources educator Mike Estadt from Pickaway County. Like always, if you like the episode, be sure to leave a comment. We'll talk to you later.
Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Josh, and we're your farm management hosts. Let's get started.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up on our Ask the Expert stage today, we have Mike Estadt. Mike Estadt is a colleague of ours here in Extension. Mike Estadt is Assistant Professor of Agriculture and Natural Resources in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences in Pickaway County as an Extension educator, and he's been with OSU Extension for over 33 years. And so he serves as an Extension educator. He does research-based information as well as resources and other land-grant university with other land-grant university information. Mike has really taken a lead on as a statewide system that plans and conducts educational programs tailored to meet the current needs of clientele locally, regionally, statewide. And a significant part of that statewide responsibility for Mike is to really focus in on climate sequestration programs associated with carbon markets and the terminologies that we hear and read about climate smart farming practices. So, Mike, did I miss anything in the bio?
No, you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
Probably too much.
No, very good, Mike, and really appreciate your expertise in this area and the ability to stay connected with. It seems like a moving target of information and who are the players, all of this. So we're going to start out with really some terminology, Mike.
Mhm.
And so recently in a lot of the literature, we are hearing about things like 45Z and CI scores. Remind us again what each of those are, and then relate that to sustainable aviation fuel.
Okay. So I think last year I talked about carbon intensity scores while I was here, and basically to remind everybody, basically that's just every fuel, all related to fuel, has a score based upon the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted during the process. I'll just use ethanol as an example because it's probably something you're all familiar with. From the farm gate to the gas tank and everything that's involved, from getting the actual raw corn to the ethanol plant to the refinery to the gas station. So there's basically a carbon footprint associated with everything in that process chain. So what a carbon intensity score, we have carbon intensity scores also with a lot of food products. You maybe have seen, like in Europe, it's very common to see an actual carbon score on food products. And again, it's the amount of greenhouse gases that are calculated to be emitted during the process of the production of food. So I want to talk quickly about 45Z. And so 45Z, I didn't really touch on it too much last year because it was kind of really new and a new concept, but it came out of the Inflation Reduction Act of, what's that, 3 years ago? And what it is really is a tax credit for the production of low carbon fuels, that whether that be gasoline, via ethanol, or again, sustainable aviation fuel. So right now, again, it's a little different. Ag isn't used to, we're used to kind of dealing with the Department of Agriculture when we go to DC, but now we get to deal with the Secretary of the Treasury and the IRS because they're the ones that are making all the rules as it relates to 45Zs. So that's kind of a brief, it's in the tax code, and it's going to tax credit to the producer of the low carbon fuel. So here in Central Ohio or West Central Ohio, if you take corn to Anderson's there at Greenville, or Valero at Washington Courthouse, or Poet at Marion, they are all thinking about this right now. So they're trying to determine whether or not it's going to be in our best interest to go after the low carbon fuel industry.
So, Mike, the 45 and then the letter Z, what is the origin of that?
That's just tax code, Bruce.
It's tax code, isn't it?
Yeah,
like
so there was 40B, there's 40Q. 40Q was actually tax credits for people to just sequester CO2 in the ground. And then there's 40B, which it was only 1 year. It expires this year, and that the IRS kind of kicked the can down the road for farmers because they bundled all the practices together. So to qualify for 40B, you had to be a no-tiller, you had to do carbon, or you had to do cover crops, you had to use some type of a nitrogen efficiency factor, something like an N-Serve or Agrotane or something like that. So they kind of knew it was only going to be 1 year. They kind of just bundled it all together. So that's why you really didn't see a lot of it. So the hope is, and again, with 45Z, it starts on January 2025. I did see an interview with Secretary Bill Sack last week that said rules, the GREET model, and I'll mention the GREET model because that's a complicated model that's going to give you your score. He said the model will be ready in January or February. So it does expire in 2027. That's kind of an issue whether or not a lot of people want to get geared up for a tax credit that may only be good for 2 years. Now, I'm part of a task force with corn growers this past year, and I know there's some talk in DC now. They're talking with our senators here in Ohio for some support to extend the 45Z out 10 years. They just don't think farmers are ready to make drastic changes in their production systems for something that may only last 2 years. So I think, Bruce, politically, there is some support to take 45Z out 10 years. So that gives ethanol plants a chance to put some infrastructure in. It gives farmers a chance to get ready to do some different things on their farms.
But again, just to clarify, the tax credit was for the fuel producer.
It is
not the grain producer.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes to the producer of the ethanol or the jet fuel.
And how that is passed on.
And then, yeah, and that's probably another. Yeah, I'll just tell you how it's going to happen. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but if you think of an ethanol plant, right now, ethanol, the CI score is 26. So they're not going to start getting the credits until they get at least down to 13. Okay, so you got to get a 50% reduction in your CI score to be able to start getting the tax credits. So theoretically, if an ethanol plant can get to 0, their ethanol is a CI score 0, and that's with a combination of either sequestering their carbon dioxide in the ground and buying low carbon corn from farmers. As it's currently set up, that's about $1.50, $1.57 a bushel corn delivered to the plant. So the question being is, how much of that is going to be shared with the farmer and how much is it going to stay within ethanol plants? So talking with ethanol plants, and you read the literature, you read popular press, they maybe think about a third of that should probably go to the farmer. So let's just say 50 cents a bushel, and you produce 200 bushel to the acre. Well, that's pretty good math. That's $100 an acre. That's serious. That's real money if you're out there farming. And so what I kind of advise folks is, if you're going to think about a CI score, you want to have a field done. There are several companies out there doing it. You're going to think about your high producing farms first, your high producing fields first. You're not going to put this into a program on a field that's a lower producing field. So as part of the equation in your GREET model, the very first thing they ask the farmer, yield. Yield is the driver. So because you take your greenhouse gas emissions, total emissions, and you divide it by the bushels, you get the CI score per bushel.
Mike, you've done some writing on CI scores. You have a nice, simple front and back fact sheet. What came about? Why did that fact sheet get written, and where can someone find that?
Yeah, you can come to the back of the Fireball. It's a real simple little thing, and I got plenty of references, but it's all really based off the GREET model, and that's the U.S. Department of Energy, the Argonne Laboratory. They score all fuels. All fuels are scored by them, and so a farmer, when they, like I said, the very first thing you sit down with one of these models that you can find on the internet, first thing they ask is yield. And they're going to ask you your tillage. Are you no-till, reduced till, tillage? They're going to ask, do you use a cover crop or no cover crop? They're going to ask, do you use manure or no manure? And then they're going to ask you how much nitrogen, fertilizer, and P and K that you use. So all these have a score. They all have an emission. So if you think about it, lowest scores are going to be people that no-till, use a cover crop, use their nitrogen efficiently, which includes a nitrogen stabilizer. If they have access to manure, the manure credit is against what synthetic fertilizer you might use. So those are, and also being like within a trucker's distance of an ethanol plant, because if you really get into the GREET score, there is a question of how far is it to your plant. So it includes the semi's carbon emission as it hauls your corn to the ethanol plant.
Mike, can you share just a reminder for everybody what is sustainable aviation fuel? What are the products that go into making it?
Sure.
Difficulties in manufacturing of it, that kind of thing.
So currently under 45Z or sustainable aviation fuel, there are about 6 different seed stocks or feedstocks that you can use to make low carbon sustainable aviation. You're trying to mimic kerosene is basically what you're doing. Aviation fuel is kerosene. And so I'll just go in order of the highest initial score is ethanol to jet fuel. It has the highest score right now as currently is scored out. Soybean oil is another component because there's a lot of things that have to be done to those oils and that ethanol to make it run in a jet engine. Then there's canola oil. So the Canadians are interested in it. You can actually look at biomass corn stover. It's actually a feedstock to make the alcohol. And then the biggest one, and the one that's got a lot too, that got a lot of attention, used cooking oil initially has the lowest score before it ever goes to the refinery. It's because it's a recyclable. It's recycled. And so used cooking oil is the one that's getting a lot of attention because where do we get 99% of our used cooking oil from? Anyone want to guess? China. And there's a lot of controversy because what else is in Southeast Asia that mimics used cooking oil that you can dump in the tanker with it? You never know it's there. Palm oil. And palm oil is a very unsustainably grown oil source. So there is legislation moving through Washington, D.C. to restrict foreign sources of used cooking oil and ethanol. And so we do have a jet fuel plant in Jet. It's in Georgia. And it's currently producing sustainable aviation fuel, I don't know, 10 million gallons a year or something like that. And so does anyone want to guess what that plant in Georgia is using as its feedstock to make aviation fuel? Anyone read anything about it? Brazil sugarcane. That's the other feedstock that's a very low CI score. And the reason it's a low CI score, first of all, sugarcane's a perennial crop. You plant it once and you get multiple crops off of it. It uses very little synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. The third thing is when they go and they crush the cane to get the juices and the sugar out that makes the alcohol, they use the byproducts of the cane, they dry it and they use it in the system for heat. They don't use natural gas to heat their ethanol plants. So it's got a really, really low CI score. So that's the controversy. We don't want Brazilian sugarcane ethanol. We don't want Chinese used cooking oil, but right now they have the lowest CI score.
So Mike, let's talk about farmers and kind of some eligibility. So what do farmers need to do to become eligible for their crops so they can sell them to a production facility that then that facility can produce ethanol to jet fuel?
Okay, well, I guess the first thing is you got to keep really good records because you really there's talk about whether you're going to actually have to identity preserve your corn to deliver to the ethanol plant or whether they're going to do what's called mass balancing. So you're going to get a certificate. Someone's going to verify your production practices. They're going to verify the field that it came off of. You're literally going to get a certificate for so many bushels at this CI score. And so that's going to be kind of a certificate. And it can be transferable. So, but you're not going to just open up a 3-ring binder and just hand the CI score person your records. So if you're using something like FieldView or Granular or whatever, they're gonna want your data. It's gonna be in electronic form. So one thing, keep good records. The second thing is maybe if you're currently delivering corn to an ethanol plant, and you know the manager, just ask them. I mean, they're all interested, but just ask them, do you have an intention to do this? I mean, they're going to say yes or no. And the third thing is it doesn't cost a lot. I mean, if you read Ag Press, you've probably all heard who Mitch Hora is, Continuum in Ag. He'll score a farm right now for $5 an acre. Score it and verify it. He's working with a third-party verifier.
Is that on an annual basis?
It's a one-time deal to actually get in, but then you'll be an annual data transmission. So that's a one-time cost per field. So, I don't know, you might want to wait on that, but you can go. If you pick up the fact sheet, I've got like 5 different places where you can go in and kind of get a rough idea where your score is today. Because the biggest majority of your score is, again, in 3 things: tillage, biomass, whether you're growing biomass there, and what is your nitrogen usage. Those are the 3 biggest components of the production. There are some other ones, but LP, and so when you get into the GREET model, it's pretty complicated, but again, the majority of your score is based on your production practices.
Is every airline company interested in this sustainable aviation fuel, or are there some of the top that are most interested so far?
Yeah, well, they all say they're interested. They all want to get it as cheap as they can, but it's more expensive than kerosene. It's about 3 times more expensive. Without the tax credits, this isn't going to happen. Okay. So, but Europe, and they've kind of backed off a little bit on the Green Deal too. So Dutch Royal Shell was building a jet fuel plant in the Netherlands. They've kind of pumped the brakes on that here recently. So that's kind of been paused. But there are rules in the EU that if you land an airplane in the EU, you have to have at least 50% onboard sustainable aviation fuel. So all the airlines want to fly to Europe.
Yeah.
And so if they want to do that, they have to have at least 50% of their fuel has to be sustainable. So
let's take a look at your crystal ball. And so what are the prospects, Mike, for this to happen here in Ohio?
I'm not going to give it odds, but there's a lot of people working on it. I'll give Tad Nicholson and your corn growers a lot of credit. They put together, we met for 6 weeks, 2 times a week, and we brought people in from all over the United States, airline people from Poet, National Corn Growers, DC. I mean, it was a really interesting fact-finding mission. There's still potential there, but it's going to really hinge on one thing really important. In my opinion, unless the ethanol plant is going to sequester their CO2, it's going to be really hard for them to get their score low enough. So there is some legislation moving through the State House right now about CO2 sequestration. So kind of stay tuned. And I guess I'll just speak for myself. After November 5th, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Okay. So because that's an important date, and if it goes one way, this all goes away, and if it goes another way, this price stays and gets more.
So how would a local ethanol plant sequester their carbon? Is it on site? Is it off site? Give us a
they're going to drill a well on site. And it's interesting. I had a conversation before I came over here with a gentleman that works in the oil business, and he knows a lot about geology, and he goes, he said, you're going to find out that maybe in Western Ohio that would work, but if you start injecting CO2 in Eastern Ohio, you don't know where it's going to come to the surface at.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Gishock and ethanol is going to be wanting to put too much CO2 in the ground. Sure. But we didn't have a lot of oil and gas extraction in Western Ohio. So I would guess geologically they might be okay. It really has to do about the migration of the CO2 out from underneath your property lines, I think, there is more than anything. But, in Iowa, if you're familiar with Summit Carbon, they're trying to build a pipeline across the state of Iowa through South Dakota up into North Dakota, parts of Minnesota and Nebraska, I think they have almost 30 ethanol plants committed, but they ran into some problems in South Dakota. So the Supreme Court there kind of sided with some people, and they're kind of still up in the air in South Dakota.
Interesting. Well, let's open it up for questions, Mike, from the crowd, the very intense crowd, and on this subject matter. Thank you for joining us on this. I'd like to entertain any questions that you might have for Mike today. Yes, sir.
This might be off.
I don't, could you, I didn't hear the question all that well. Well, I think I know the gist of your question about replacing the type of fuel. And that's something that was talked about it, will the Boeings of the world create a different jet engine that'll run on something different than kerosene? I mean, the energy component is really the reason that's what they use. And our ethanol doesn't have enough energy by mass for jet engines. That's kind of the gist of it. But I don't think I've really seen much as a replacement, a fuel replacement right now. Jet engine manufacturers they've got billions and billions of dollars set up in what they do now. So we're not going to go solar or energy on large commercial flights yet. Hydrogen is still up in the air. Ever find a safety factor in hydrogen, we would probably go that route.
Excellent. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Right. So it's a little different. This is a different game. I talked to a lot of no-tillers, 15, 20 years no-tillers. The carbon credit programs, they don't want anything to do with you because they want to sequester new carbon. They don't want to pay you for something that you put in the ground 15 years ago. So that's kind of why the offset thing is kind of went away. It hasn't went away. That's why there's so much attention on this, because if you're a no-tiller and you've been no-tilling for 50 years and you're a cover crop guy or whatever, and you use N-Serve, or you don't have, this program includes you because they're just scoring the product that just comes off your farm. So yeah, it's just like what emissions were you responsible for in the production of the soybean or the corn or the canola? So yeah, if you're a long-term conservation guy, low carbon energy you'd be good. You already probably have an initial low carbon score anyway, CI score anyway. So you wouldn't have to do much other than the record keeping requirement and a verification.
Good question. Yes, sir.
Just kind of surprised with the fuel plants and close that circle with farmers who are sequestering carbon in the soil in a better way than injecting gaseous carbon into the ground.
Well, it's like the biggest byproduct of an ethanol plant is CO2. Some of them capture some of it and make dry ice. Some of them capture it and sell it to the beverage industry. But when you look at what happens when you take that corn and you grind it and you put warm water on it and you add yeast to it, there's a lot of CO2 comes off of it. And so that works against them on their score. So really I don't think they can't get enough zero carbon, or they can't get enough zero corn to balance out to get their score low enough. So yeah, so it's going to be an issue. Is going to be, can they sequester the carbon? So there's some interesting technology. You dig into this a lot, and then I've seen CO2 blocks where they'll take CO2 and they be the size. It might be 10 feet long, 5-6 feet wide, and it's just a mass block of CO2. And they actually find a way to stabilize that, and they use it some of them use it in the building industry. It's all prototype right now. It's expensive to do that, but what wasn't these were pretty expensive at one time too. So whether it sticks around long enough that we can get to that technology, different ways instead of injecting it into the ground, can we capture it and store it in other forms.
Other questions for Mike while we have him right here? Yes, sir.
Sorry, we came late. Will
No.
your presentation be available online if we register?
So we did record this. If you would reach out to those of us that Ask the Expert or over at the farm office building, or just mention to me, I have my business card with you. We can exchange that.
Yeah.
Be glad to share a recording with you and additional information mentioned. Another question right here.
Yeah, carbon intensity score, obviously a big component is how you grow the corn, but you mentioned about even the drying process, if you're using electricity, gas, whatever.
So-
Then, yeah, it's a solar or windmills or some sort of renewable that help your.
So that's a really good question, a really good point. Because when you look at the 45Z and you look at the GREET model, when you look down on the ethanol producer side, they ask the ethanol plant, are you using renewable energy in your plant? And that lowers their score. So if they put a solar field out around their ethanol plant and they can create part of their energy usage based on renewable fuel or renewable gas, if they take methane and clean the methane and they use that in their plant, that lowers their score. Farmers the same way. If you're going to do on-farm solar, you're going to lower your score. That is included in the complete GREET model. They ask you how much renewable energy are you using on your farm. That's a really good point. Good question.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Let's thank Mike for his expertise today here at Ask the Expert.
Thanks for listening today.
For more information about farm management tips, be sure to check out the farm office at farmoffice.osu.edu.